The Red Queen suddenly grabbed Alice by the hand and took off sprinting. Faster and faster they ran until Alice was so out of breath she thought she'd never recover even enough to speak again. Again, the Queen insisted, faster, faster. Alice hung on for dear life to the ever-accelerating life-sized chess piece until their velocity increased to such speeds that it seemed their feet were no longer even touching the ground. Then, as fast as it had begun, it was over. Alice found herself seated on the ground, breathless and giddy, until she looked up and found that she was in the exact same spot she had been when they'd started running. They hadn't moved at all. Alice told the Queen, remarking that where she came from, if you ran that fast for that long, you generally got somewhere new. The Queen's response highlighted the peculiarity of her reality. Quote, "A slow sort of country," said the Queen. "Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you have to run at least twice as fast as that." This excerpt from the sequel to Alice in Wonderland, titled Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, was written by beloved English author Lewis Carroll, actually named Charles Dodson, in 1871. It's since been dubbed the Red Queen's Race, and it perfectly described the world at that time, and it perfectly describes what it's like to work in tech right now. The 1860s and 70s formed the opening refrain of the explosive second act of the Industrial Revolution. At the time of writing this book, Carroll, who was also a well-respected and eccentric Oxford mathematician, was watching the metaphorical landscape itself start to accelerate as fast as the people trying to keep up with it. Just 2 years prior to him completing Through the Looking Glass, the US had barely finished the Transcontinental Railroad, revolutionizing the transportation of people and goods in a way never before imagined. Just a few years before that, information had transitioned from traveling at the speed of a ship to traveling at the speed of light with the first transatlantic telegraph cable across the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in 1866. So when Carroll talks about it taking all you can do just to stay in the same place, he wasn't being cute. He was railing against a change at an impossible pace reality that he was witnessing real time. Carroll's analogy endures not just because of its sharp and cathartic social commentary, but also because in 1973, an evolutionary biologist named Lee Van Valen used it as a basis upon which he proposed the Red Queen hypothesis. The Red Queen hypothesis states that any competing organism must by definition continue to adapt perpetually or risk going extinct. While there are a few outliers like horseshoe crabs and crocodiles, overwhelmingly, we see this phenomenon play out in most living organisms. For example, if foxes eat all the slower rabbits, then only faster rabbits will pass on their genes to the next generation. In turn, the rabbits get faster and slower foxes begin to die. Therefore, both species are forced onto an ever-alternating seesaw, and neither can ever afford to keep their foot off the evolutionary gas. The Red Queen hypothesis is applicable in all human competitions as well. Sometimes, in society, it's referred to as the rat race. And the reason it can feel so futile is because it yields the exact same response from its victims as it did from Alice. You look around after all the physical exertion you can muster, only to find that it hasn't changed anything because the landscape is literally running as fast as you are. You've either maintained the slight lead you had on your competition, or they've slightly overtaken you. This concept of the landscape moving along with us was actually expounded upon near the same time that Carroll wrote Through the Looking Glass, reinforcing the notion that the 1860s were a period of rapid innovation and change. In 1865, William Stanley Jevons, an English economist, published a book called The Coal Question, which delivered a blunt critique to the British economy regarding unsustainable coal consumption. 100 years earlier, during the first Industrial Revolution, another Englishman, James Watt, had come up with a highly efficient new design for the steam engine, drastically reducing the amount of coal needed to power them. Over the next century, steam engines started showing up in everything due to this new efficient design. The British government and business leaders have been incorrectly assuming for just shy of a century that because Watt's new engine was so efficient, their precious supply of coal was more than enough to sustain them indefinitely. But Jevons pointed out that increasing the efficiency of a resource does not decrease the consumption of that resource. It actually exponentially increases the demand for it, which is exactly what happened with coal consumption. Prior to Watt's engine, steam power had not been cost-effective enough for industries to even consider it. The efficiency of the new engine didn't save the coal. It unleashed an insatiable economy-wide demand for it. This is the exact dynamic playing out in corporate America right now. We're being sold a utopian vision that AI will make us so efficient that we'll finally get our time back. It won't. AI is the new steam engine, and human execution is the coal. When you use AI agents to go from, for example, clearing 2 support tickets a day to 20, you're making execution incredibly cheap and efficient. This is where the two concepts collide. The Jevons Paradox is the what, and the Red Queen's race is the why. Jevons Paradox tells us what happens when execution becomes cheap. Your company does not demand less execution. They demand an explosion of it. They demand insanely complex dashboards, massive expansions of target markets, and highly customized pipelines that they could have never dreamed of asking for a couple years ago. But the Red Queen's race tells us why it happened. Your company isn't demanding more output out of pure greed. They're doing it for survival. The competitor down the street just bought the exact same AI tools. If your company stops running, the competitor eats their market share. The brutal biological reality of competition, the Red Queen, is the actual engine that forces the endless consumption of efficiency. Jevons Paradox. The major flaw in the AI landscape that I don't think anyone has a real solution to yet is the digital Red Queen's race is being shrouded by venture capitalists and tech giants subsidizing the massive compute costs. It feels like magic, but eventually those subsidies will dry up. The true cost of burning millions of tokens will kick in. And when it does, the math of paying a human a full-time salary plus a massive compute bill to run that human's AI agents just to maintain the new hyper-fast baseline simply will not pencil out. We'll have to face the terrifying macroeconomic reality of that transition in the near future. But for you, and now I'm speaking to anyone who works primarily on a computer, the strategy is clear. You cannot win a volume game against the machine. If you just use AI to do your job faster, you are the coal. You will be burned up by the Jevons Paradox. To survive this transition, you have to step off the treadmill. You have to stop competing on execution speed, take all of the localized intuition and taste you've built, and utilize all that execution power that AI gives you to figure out how to bring more value. And speaking of the word value, the faster our world moves, the lazier our definition of what qualifies as truly valuable work. Next week, I'll be exploring the true meaning of the word value with history and psychology as a guide. So if that sounds valuable to you, then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.